and I would like to bring both Rachael and Jori to stage. Welcome, Rachael and Jori.
Hello.
All right.
Hi there.
Let me also adding some pins here really quick so everyone can see all three of us. Gallery view, great. We are recording. It's 4:21. Day's going strong and arguably one of the most important events. I know that I'm quote unquote Gen Z, millennial, whatever you want to call me. But I use my cell phone all the time. I use social media personally as well as with work. And so we can't seem to not read the news and see something about social media. And it's a tool that can be used for good, but also something that has gotten some people into trouble. So I'm really excited to have two very experienced experts in this field of social media here, Rachael and Jori. So without me blabbering on too much more, which everyone has heard of maybe too much today, Rachael and Jori, the floor is yours.
So Rachel's going to start, but I have the presentation on my computer. So I am going to, here we go, share my screen, if I do this correctly.
Technology. You got to love it.
Yep.
Did I do that correctly?
You
yes,
nailed it.
I can see it.
Oh, okay, good. There we go.
So,
all right, go ahead.
I'm just going to briefly start and kind of give you a very high level snapshot of why and when you should use social media. The reality is social media is here. It's going to stay and it's not going to go away. And tomorrow there's probably going to be a new social media type for your department to learn about. So the first question is, why should we use social media? So the reason why is to provide education and share your agency's story with your community. And I'm not talking like education in the sense of risk reduction, although that's super important. I'm talking about education as to who you are as an agency, what you do, what you've done, and how you're actively involved in your community. Next slide.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
So when should we use social media? I think that's a pretty relevant question because a lot of people differ on opinions. For me, I believe in quality over quantity. So even if you've got something to post every day, is it quality? So when should you be? When you have a critical or life-saving information that needs to be shared with your community. Maybe there's a fire or a flood, something where you need to get that information out fast, but don't rely on that information either, because remember, social media can go down. I'm ready for the next one.
Okay.
So to provide education on a topic or information about an incident that your department has responded to. Again, I'm not talking about the risk reduction education. Again, super important. And I do highly recommend using social media for it. I'm talking about, maybe your department just got a second set of bunker gear or brand new SCBA equipment. Share that with your community so that they understand what their dollars are paying for. Next one. Before there's a crisis. And I know this sounds kind of weird because we can't predict when a crisis is going to happen, but they do happen. So by using social media for the previous two, especially sharing your story and education about you with your community, you are going to be ready when that next crisis occurs. So I'm going to kind of move forward and give you an example on how educating your community is super beneficial before there's a crisis, because what happens when there is a crisis. So next slide, Jori. So July 11th of last year was a day that I will never forget. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were dispatched to a grass fire 12 miles north of town. You can hit to the example, the photos.
Okay.
Yeah. So to just kind of give you a brief overview, we're 288 square miles. So we're huge. 98% of our district is rural and agriculture, as you'll see in the 2 photos below. The other 2%, although it produces our highest call volume, is actually the town of Wellington with a little over 12,000 people. So on July 11th, we were dispatched to a grass fire. As you can see, there was a home directly involved and a dairy farm. So both of our stations responded. Our crew was up there. They were able to get it controlled quickly, but because of the proximity of homes, we had to be there until we knew that that fire was out. Flash forward to 1830. We dropped a structure fire within the town of Wellington. Now remember, both of our fire stations, one of which was in their gear for fighting a grass fire, was 12 miles north of town when this happened. So it took a little bit for us to respond. By the time we showed up, our neighboring fire agency had already been there, and community members were mad. They wanted to know where we were. So I was able to get everything kind of under control. I let people know things started to calm down a little bit. The next day I posted information finally on the grass fire and on the structure fire. And this is what happened. You can go to the next slide, Jori. So on our page, I shared what happened. I then had a community member share this into a community page called Let's Talk Wellington. We had a citizen who made the comment that we had no business on a grass fire unless it's threatening city property. Now, prior to all of this happening, we had gone to the voters a few years before. So I had provided a bunch of education to our community members, how big we are, what's in our district, how we're funded, all of that stuff. And this is why that moment was so important. So in a community member's response to that, we got this response from them. She educated and said, so the people living in the rural areas of our district doesn't matter. She was able to provide that education, because I'm not monitoring this page 24 hours a day, to him. So he then responds later on about funding. And kind of to keep it short, it's just, talking about managing city budgets and things like that. That same person then responded with this. So we're actually a separate government entity. We fund ourselves on property tax, and that's what she was able to provide that education for. That's why being able to educate your community on your story, what's going on for you, how you operate on social media is so important. Because when there is a crisis, because this was a crisis, our community was mad. Unfortunately, the house was a total loss. It did spread to the neighboring home, which just happened to be a volunteer firefighter on shift that day. But our community rose to our back. They stood up for us and provided that education. So it's so important to get it out. Start doing it now. Little tiny things that you're doing, let your community know, because there will become a point, if you already haven't had that, where they're going to be the ones advocating for you. And there's no better voice for advocation than your own community. It's all you, Jori.
All right. So now I have to do my own PowerPoint. So just to introduce myself, I have to look at the camera and the PowerPoint's on the wrong screen. So, you know what, maybe I'll move it over here. I can't even do that. So just to introduce myself, my name is Jori Wilmoth. That was my sister presenting about COVID. But I work for Darley, and I manage our social media, our videos, I forget my title, creative marketing specialist. I also do the PR and marketing for FDSOA, the Fire Department Safety Officers Association. So I I think I manage a sum total of, I haven't counted lately, but it's like 26 different social media accounts across all of the Facebooks and Twitters and LinkedIn and TikTok and all of them. So Rachel talked about kind of fire department social media as a whole. And I'm going to talk about firefighter social media, kind of your personal social media, and kind of the do's and don'ts, because as much as we talk about kind of the do's and don'ts of social media, Kevin was right there. A day does not pass that I cannot find an article in the newspaper about a firefighter who is, I'm not going to say always doing something bad and getting called out for it in the media for doing something on social media, but also sometimes doing something good. But you are always known first as a firefighter, and the media will always call you first a firefighter. So, you know, you have a right to have a social media account, but you really want to consider what you're posting on your social media account. So you want to post pictures and images that are professional, even on your personal account, and safe, and represent who you are as a firefighter. You don't post pictures of yourself in unprofessional situations, in unsafe situations, even on your personal account, because again, you are always known as a firefighter. And if you're at work, certainly not with patients on accident scenes, with company equipment, or with other personnel without their permission. And I would remind you, I'd ask you to remember how much effort it took to become a firefighter. In October, a Chicago firefighter was fired for racist and violent social media posts that he made. And it's not easy to join any fire department. So, you know, you can lose it with one post. You can lose all of that with one post, one comment. It doesn't take that much. You don't want to post about your job, your supervisors, city government, patients, incidents. I say here, do be careful who your friends are, and you can be friends with whoever you want, but I would say be careful who you are friends with on social media, because if you're known by who your friends are, and if your friends are friends who are posting pictures of themselves doing drugs, drinking heavily every weekend, or you will be known by the company that you keep, even on social media. You also want to check your privacy settings. Now, I wouldn't lean on those privacy settings to keep your account completely private. You know, you don't want to post anything that you're not ready to see on the front page of a newspaper, but I still check your privacy settings and make sure that you are keeping your account as private as you want to keep it, so that hopefully you won't see what you're posting on the front page of a newspaper. Don't misrepresent yourself online. You don't want to lie. If you hide behind a fake name, fake picture, you can be found. It's a lot easier to find people online these days by you know, IP addresses, and it's a lot easier to find people than one might think. And don't pick fights. There are a lot of hot button issues these days, be it politics, religion, politics, but no matter what, you'll lose. not necessarily that you'll lose that fight, but you will lose on sorry, I got distracted by the question. You will lose whether it's you'll look like a bully, or you will say something that maybe later when you calm down you'll regret. But don't get in fights online. Don't rise to the occasion, or lower yourself to getting in fights, because those are the times when you will likely say something that you'll regret. These are just things that I picked up that happened kind of all in well, one of these was from a week after I pulled it. So within 1 week, there's the Chicago firefighter that lost their job. They're not all bad. I mean, there's one here where there's a firefighter from Indiana who practices tap dancing. There's one firefighter that went to the US Capitol. But the biggest thing to remember is you are always a firefighter or a fire chief, or firefighter, fire chief. It's the first thing the media is going to say about you. If they say something about what you did on social media, in your free time, it is the first thing they will say about you is, Chicago firefighter, Maui firefighter. Sorry, that was the first place in Hawaii that came to my mind. I apologize. But former firefighter, it is the first thing they will say about you is that you're a firefighter, whether you did something on your personal time or whether you did it on, heaven forbid, you do it on duty, is that you are a firefighter. It is how you will be known if you are named in the media for doing something, especially on social media. So that's what I've got. Questions?
Thanks, Jori and Rachel. Rachel, did you want to say something before I get some questions going?
Nope.
Great. Well, we'll start with the first question I see here. I've also got a couple other pre-prepared questions, but from Lou, from an organizational standpoint, how do you decide on either ignoring, responding to, or deleting posts in the public that are blatantly false, violent, racist, or otherwise designed to simply cause trouble?
So I'm gonna take a stab at this and guess that you mean on like your personal or on your organization's social media pages. Unfortunately, once it's posted to your organization's pages, it can't come down. They are now part of the public information world, and they are for open records requests. Now, each state might be a little bit different. So definitely double check to make sure. But I know in the state of Colorado, which is where I'm at, once something is posted to our social media pages, it doesn't get deleted, unfortunately. Now, with that being said, I'm not going to be the one who's going to be posting things that are, blatantly false, violent, and any of that. So when it comes to that kind of stuff, and this gets tricky. So a lot of places have community, I'm going to use Facebook, for example. They have community Facebook pages. 90% of the time they are, let's complain about this place. So we have Let's Talk Wellington, and everybody knows that it's basically let's complain about Wellington. 3 weeks ago, we had somebody post in there about our ambulance. We contract out our ambulance service being taken away. So that was false. Now, I don't respond in those. I'm not asking them to take it down because you can't, unfortunately. But what I did on our page after monitoring it for a weekend is I addressed it. I acknowledged that there was a post, and that's okay. You can acknowledge that don't name the site that you saw it, just acknowledge that you know that this information is out there. And this is the information that you want to correct, and provide that information. If you get trolls on there, ignore the trolls. It's gonna happen. Think about only posting facts. So just let them go. It's hard. I want to respond a lot to certain things that I know are just blatantly not true, but you just have to let them go and not address them. If it's not something that's, life-threatening. And then just to kind of tag, so I'm actually the director of public relations, also full-time PIO for Wellington Fire, which is in Northern Colorado. So I've been doing this for almost 6 years now.
Jori, did you want to provide some context on that in terms of how to respond to kind of a crazy, wacky comment?
Usually, I mean, ours is a little different because generally I've been responding to them for Darley, so it's a little different for from a corporate perspective, because generally I am responding directly to, I mean, we don't get very ones that are racist or violent or and those ones I do actually delete, but comments about our products and things I do directly respond, and I do respond to people and start kind of a conversation with them about our products if they have comments to make about them. So, but obviously that's from a very different perspective than a fire department.
One thing, and I can add, so one thing that a lot of agencies are doing is we're starting to create policies for our community members that we're posting. So it's basically rules that designate just that. It actually addresses when somebody can delete a violent, a racist, that kind of information. So it puts it on there. Definitely have lawyers look at it, make sure, again, it fits within your open records laws, things like that. But that could be one way to address it. And you just put it in your about sections. On Twitter, if you have Twitter accounts, you can pin it as the very top post. Facebook, same thing, you can pin them as well. So that could be one way, is kind of creating a policy for your community members.
Good. So we've got 2 questions, one in the chat, one in the Q&A, and a poll question. I'm going to ask the chat question as regards to the PIO, and then I'm also going to launch the poll question about if you have a full-time PIO. The question from Elijah is, hello, Jori and Rachael. We have a PIO in our department. As far as crisis and social media, do you feel it would be more important to leave it to them to convey messages and completely stay away from crisis updates? My worry is it could cause different information being sent out, which would cause different reactions from the public. And I'm also going to launch this poll about whether if you have a PIO in your department. So Rachael?
So as the department's PIO, absolutely. If you have somebody in that role, it should be their responsibility to provide that information. So those updates on social media, partner with command staff. So if we have a situation that deems a crisis, I'm always partnering in my battalion chiefs and fire chief. So that way they're the ones that can relay it to the line personnel that this is what's going on, but I'm the one that's in charge of updating social media and monitoring the community that way. Because yeah, absolutely. If you've got a bunch of different people chiming in on stuff, then the message can go one direction, misinformation get placed. So if you've got a full-time PIO or just somebody assigned that, use them.
So I just we just closed the poll here, and maybe this could provide some context in general. It showed about 67% of the audience has a PIO, about 33% don't. This PIO maybe Rachel, if you could provide a little context, what is the PIO and why should every department have a PIO?
So a PIO is a public information officer. It is my job to work with the media, community members, anything to provide information. And to keep it short and simple, the primary job of a PIO is to get the right information to the right people at the right time. That is my job. So whether it's updating the community on an incident that we responded to, letting them know if there's a road closure because of a grass fire, that is my job. So I think it's important, and I know a lot of agencies are small and can't have a me. In all honesty, most agencies in our area that are our size, although we're large landmass wise, we only run about 100 calls a year, or 1,000 calls a year, more than 100, 1,000 calls a year. We're growing and growing quickly, and that's why they brought me on. I was actually originally brought on because we were going to the voters for a mill levy increase. So again, providing that education, why it's important to have that PIO function. It doesn't have to be a full-time PIO either. It can be somebody that's super excited about it, but just make sure that they're doing everything within the constraints of public information laws. Don't be posting. This sounds weird. I understand like the kitty cat things and things like that. They're great. They provide a little bit of joy. But back to Jori's things, you also want to have some professionalism on your fire page. So that's kind of what my job is. I get to have fun and talk to people.
Rachel, when you post things at like for as the kind of the PIO, when you're posting things on social media, are your members then allowed to share those as official updates?
Yes, absolutely. So they're allowed to share, but that's all that they're allowed to do is share.
Sure.
They can't add their own update. I mean, so I know we've mentioned social media policies a couple of times. We actually have a social media policy, and I highly encourage, if your department doesn't have one, start working on one today, because not only does it protect you as an agency, but it also protects your firefighters. So we have it in our policy that they cannot post to their social media pages about incidents, things like that, especially if they're on duty. And part of that too, again, understanding your open records laws. When our people are on duty, their phones, if they do things like that, it assumes that they're posting while on their pages as a representative of the district.
Sure.
And so it can open up their phones to some lovely open records requests.
So we've got a good question from Doug, and I think I want to now phrase in turn some of the conversation in regards to how social media can be used for good and the advantages and benefits of it. And I experience this too, sometimes dealing with people who don't know how to, kind of poking at Todd earlier, like don't even know how to fully use a cell phone or different aspects, what is it, face space or my chat or whatever. And they just think it's all just kind of a razz, but social media can be a very effective tool to engage and communicate and improve public safety from a public safety outreach, community risk reduction standpoint. So there's a lot of benefits to it, even if you are on the side of the fence that it shouldn't exist. But to Doug's the best question. How do you convince your public officials that it is important and okay to have a fire department social media page? Some of the older members of the board are against us posting anything. Would love for some suggestions and help. Thanks.
So I too ran into that when I first started. Our board and even our fire chief, they just didn't understand social media. They didn't think it was beneficial. So then I come in, and I came from the private sector before this. So I had zero fire background knowledge. I knew you put the wet stuff on the hot stuff, and that was it. And our board tells us that we are about ready to go to the voters to increase their property taxes 5 mils, which is a big chunk when it comes to property taxes for us. And I said, let's hit the social media. Guess what? It worked using that for the good things. You saved a puppy, you were able to help the Smiths, change out their smoke detectors. Those little things are what get your community to buy into you and understand who you are as a department. So give them those examples. I know social media is scary. Yes, you're going to have trolls. Don't do the whole glitter, sunshine, sparkles thing. You're going to have trolls. People are deliberately going to post to cause trouble. That's okay. As weird as this sounds, that means that your community is paying attention to you. So you're out there. And it's those little things that can really make or break when it comes to a crisis. Like I said, it wasn't me educating the community when we had that structure fire. It was our community advocating for us. So if that's anything, really push that advocacy of your community. And again, if you ever have to go back to them for more money, social media is there, and that's what's going to do it.
Jori, any thoughts in regards to how to showcase that social media is a tool for good and to convince people who are against it that it can be used for a force for good for the fire service?
I think Rachael covered a lot of it. I think one thing that you need to do if you're just starting out in doing that is really make sure that, one person or, just a couple of people are really managing that, and not just, hey, we set up social media and, open it up, but really managing, the social media for the department so that you can show, whoever it is that didn't want it, that, hey, we're we're showing the community, we're sharing with them safe practices about different things, and it's another, you're basically demonstrating it's another tool to reach out to them.
It's also good for recruitment. So if you have a difficult time getting people, signing up for, especially if you're an all volunteer agency, using social media for recruitment is huge because it's showing what your department is doing. And if they need examples, you guys are always more than welcome. Again, I'm with Wellington Fire Protection District. I see that my LinkedIn, I should have a link on there. You can take a look at our stuff. Another good one is also South Metro Fire here in Colorado. What Eric Hurst has done for that agency and shown how social media can be used to educate is fantastic. And they are perfect. So definitely take a look at Eric's stuff. I know Eric, and what he's done for recruitment, for education, it's fantastic. That's my goal. We're just not as busy as South Metro.
All right, so a couple other questions that regard this topic that I think are important. The first is in regard to the whole First Amendment in protecting firefighter posting online. I've seen some conversation on like what we say can be used against us and or freedom of speech. Just you want to elaborate a little bit on that in regards to how that pertains to the fire service?
So the First Amendment, it plays into, especially if you have a social media policy, fire departments, you don't want to find out that your social media policy is suddenly invalid because it violates a firefighter's First Amendment. A fire department can't prohibit the use of social media, because that violates free speech. So a firefighter's free speech is protected for them as a private citizen, and as for them as a public concern. However, it doesn't mean that they are protected in against department discipline. So, they're not protected, from the department rules. And, it really, what it comes down to is called the Pickering balance test. And I have no idea where that came from, but it weighs a firefighter's right to speak on matters of public concern against maintaining the health of his or her agency's mission, and whether the firefighter's comments disrupt the harm or disrupt the mission of his or her department. So if your comments disrupt or harm the mission of your department, then that's going to be an issue. What it really comes down to, though, is that oh, hey, Pickering versus Board of Education, a Supreme Court case. Well, that makes sense. But it really comes down to the fact that a person, whether it's a chief or an arbitrator or a judge, someone is going to make that decision on whether it's the firefighter's right to speak, or if it or if the comments harm or disrupt the mission of the fire department, if they've gone too far. And I guess, as a person commenting on social media, you really have to weigh whether it's worth putting, whether it's worth kind of whether it's worth making that comment.
Rachel, anything else there?
Nope. I think Jori got that one right there.
So I think that ties into one of the last points that I want to bring up before final comments from you both is the road to formally creating a social media policy. We talked about the need for PIO, individual firefighter, fire department. If someone watches this and they're like, you know what, maybe we could start somewhere, but where is that somewhere in regards to creating a social media policy for their department?
I am more than happy. I can type my email in the chat. I'm more than happy to share ours. But really think about, I think, a couple of things. What is the purpose of your social media policy? Two, what are the open records request laws in your state? Because they are going to differ a little bit from every state. What, for us, and is funding sounds kind of weird, but I know that there are some volunteer agencies that are donation based. There are some that are fire agencies that are part of a city. So if your city already has a social media policy, reach out to them. And maybe it's just changing a couple of things to adjust so that it fits the fire side of things. But understand, when that person is on duty, they're essentially being paid by tax dollars. So when you're creating that, think about that too. What can they do on duty that then opens them up for those open record requests? I think those are kind of the good places. What's the purpose? And if you're a city organization, do they already have one? Jori?
If you Google fire department social media policy, you'll come up with a number of examples. I have some examples. I think the best kind of framework that I found was on Kurt Verone's firelawblog.com. And I have a copy of it too, but it doesn't just give you kind of one to copy and paste, but it kind of asks you kind of different blocks of questions that for your own department, so that you can it goes through kind of what Rachel just said, and, you know, different laws in your state and how they fit in for your state, and how does this apply to your department, and different things. And that's kind of it's a good framework to work through, like, you know, different factors, things like that. So that's where I would start.
Love it. All right. Well, final last comments here. This is sort of a question, a comment, a challenge to the audience, kind of 60 seconds or less. Either one of you.
I'll let you start, Jori.
You are always a firefighter, whether you are wearing a uniform or not, whether you are on your personal social media, whether your personal social media, you know, says that you're a firefighter or not. You are always going to be a firefighter, a fire chief. And if you do something stupid, it's the first thing the media will say about you.
I think for me, social media is here. It's not going away. And like I said earlier, chances are there's going to be a brand new one for you tomorrow to learn about and to post. So don't be afraid of it. There's always going to be negative sides to it, but have fun. What works for your community is the best thing that works for you. So
Well said. And I have one last final comment from me in regards to it. I use social media all the time, and someone that I learned a lot of social media tactics from is an entrepreneur I follow. His name's Gary Vaynerchuk. There's a lot of people who use social media in different ways, but and we didn't even touch on how they're kind of specifically use the different platforms, but there definitely is a science to using Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, TikTok, Snapchat. The list goes on, and
That's a
they
whole
all,
other presentation.
yeah, that's a whole other presentation, but things that I'm here to help as a Rachael and Jori. So Rachael and Jori, on behalf of the Hawaii Fire Chiefs Association, thank you. You both provide a lot of valuable context here. Great chat. So